The dust swirled around the broken transport pod as Rita stood beside it, her 3 children huddled close against her legs. The youngest, barely old enough to walk, whimpered softly while the older 2 stared at the barren landscape with wide, terrified eyes. Their fine clothing, once the mark of the Galactic Commerce Guild elite, now hung in tatters, stained with hydraulic fluid and the red clay of this backwater planet called Earth. Rita's communication device had shattered in the crash. Her credit chips fried beyond recognition, and her emergency beacon sat silent in her trembling hands. The pod's life support would fail within hours. She had gambled everything on a shortcut through an uncharted system, trying to outrun the debt collectors who had seized her late husband's empire. Now she was stranded on a planet that wasn't even part of the Galactic Registry, with no way to call for help and 3 hungry children depending on her. The sound of an engine made her antennae twitch. A primitive ground vehicle appeared over the ridge, kicking up a cloud of dust as it rumbled down the dirt road. The vehicle was ancient by galactic standards, powered by combustion rather than plasma, painted a faded blue that had seen better decades. It rolled to a stop 30 meters away, and a human emerged. He was tall and weathered, with skin bronzed by solar radiation and lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent squinting into harsh sunlight. He wore denim pants, leather boots, and a wide-brimmed hat that seemed designed to provide shade. A checked shirt covered his broad shoulders. He stood there for a moment, hands on his hips, studying the crashed pod and the alien family beside it. Rita straightened her spine, trying to maintain some dignity despite her circumstances. She had negotiated with sector governors and trade ministers. She wouldn't be intimidated by a primitive local. No matter how desperate her situation got, the human walked closer, his boots crunching on the gravel. When he was close enough, he tipped his hat back and looked directly at her, with eyes the color of Earth's sky. "Ma'am," he said simply, "looks like you're in a spot of trouble." Rita's translator implant processed the language, rendering it in her native tongue. "I am experiencing technical difficulties," she said, her voice carrying the clipped precision of someone used to being obeyed. "I require access to a quantum communicator and temporary shelter while arrangements are made." The human's expression didn't change. He glanced at the pod, then at her children, then back at her. "That thing's gonna stop breathing air in about 3 hours, give or take. You got water?" "I have emergency supplies sufficient for." "You got water?" He repeated, his tone patient but firm. Rita's pride warred with reality. "No." The human nodded slowly. He looked at the 3 children, and up at the sun hanging mercilessly in the cloudless sky. "Temperature's gonna hit 40 degrees before noon. Nearest town's 2 hours that way, and they ain't got nothing you'd call a quantum whatever. Hospital's another hour past that. And Doc Miller's gonna have questions I can't answer about your biology. I simply need to contact." "Get in my pickup right now," the human said, cutting her off. His voice was calm, but carried an authority that made Rita's words die in her throat. "Your kids need water, shade, and food. You can figure out the rest after that. My ranch is 20 minutes from here. You'll be safe there." Rita stared at him. In the Galactic Commerce Guild, no one offered help without calculating the profit margin first. Charity was a weakness, and weakness was exploited. "What do you want in return?" The human looked genuinely confused. "Ma'am, what is your price?" "I have no functional currency, but I can offer future compensation once I re-establish contact with. I ain't asking for payment," he said, his tone suggesting she'd said something vaguely offensive. "I'm offering you help because you need it, and I can give it. That's how things work out here." Rita's mind struggled to process this. The human wasn't posturing. He wasn't negotiating. He was simply stating facts as he saw them. Her youngest child chose that moment to start crying in earnest, the sound raw and desperate. The human's expression softened. "Please, ma'am, let me help your kids." Something in Rita broke. All the pride, all the careful dignity she'd maintained through her husband's death and the subsequent financial collapse, crumbled under the weight of her children's needs. She nodded once, sharp and quick. The human moved immediately. He opened the back door of his vehicle and pulled out bottles of water, offering them to the children first. The oldest took one hesitantly, then drank with desperate gulps when the human nodded encouragement. He produced a blanket from behind the seat and spread it on the ground in the vehicle's shade, gesturing for them to sit. "Name's Jack Morrison," he said as he helped the youngest child drink. "I run cattle about 5,000 acres south of here. It ain't fancy, but it's solid. You and your kids can stay as long as you need." "I am Rita," she said quietly. "These are my children, Bella, Marcus, and Thomas." Jack smiled at the children. "Good, strong names. You folks like pancakes? My housekeeper makes the best in 3 counties. Thomas, the middle child, looked up at his mother with desperate hope in his eyes. Rita felt her throat tighten. "We would be grateful." She managed the drive to Jack's ranch, took them through landscape that Rita would have dismissed as provincial and underdeveloped 48 hours ago. Now, seeing it through her children's wondering eyes, she noticed the vast sky, the rolling hills dotted with grazing animals, and the surprising beauty of simplicity. Jack kept up a steady stream of gentle conversation, pointing out landmarks and telling stories that made the children forget their fear. The ranch house was exactly what Jack had promised, solid and unpretentious. It was a sprawling single-story structure with a wraparound porch and shutters that had been painted and repainted over decades. As they pulled up, an older human woman emerged, wiping her hands on an apron. "Jack Morrison, who have you brought home now?" She called out, but her tone was warm rather than accusatory. "Visitors. Mrs. Patterson. They need help." Mrs. Patterson took one look at Rita and the children and moved into action with the efficiency of someone who dealt with emergencies before. Within minutes, the children were seated at a large wooden table with plates of pancakes, fruit, and milk. Rita tried to maintain her composure, but when Mrs. Patterson gently touched her shoulder and said, "You eat too, dear. You look like you've been carrying the world," she found herself crying for the first time. Since her husband's death, the days that followed blurred together in a haze of unexpected kindness. Jack contacted the local authorities, who contacted larger authorities, who eventually put Rita in touch with a human research institute that had limited contact with the Galactic Commerce Guild. The process would take weeks, possibly months. Rita prepared herself for the demands that would surely come. The price for the Morrison Ranch's hospitality. The price never came. Instead, Jack showed her children how to feed the chickens. Mrs. Patterson taught Bella how to bake bread. Marcus discovered a love for the horses in Jack's stable, and Thomas followed Jack everywhere like a devoted shadow, absorbing stories about earth agriculture and animal husbandry. Rita found herself drawn into the rhythm of ranch life, her corporate instincts slowly unwinding in the face of honest labor and simple pleasures. One evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, Rita found Jack on the porch, watching the cattle in the distant pasture. "Why?" she asked simply. Jack took a sip of his coffee and was quiet for a long moment. "My granddad used to say that the measure of a civilization ain't in its technology or its wealth. It's in how it treats folks who can't pay it back. He said the universe is hard enough without us making it harder on each other. In my world, that philosophy would be considered dangerously naive." "Maybe," Jack said, "but I've been to your cities. I've seen your stations through the feeds and the news reports. They got buildings that touch the clouds and ships that cross galaxies. But I've also seen the way folks there treat each other when profit ain't on the table. All that advancement? And for what? To forget that we're all just trying to take care of our families? Rita had no answer. She thought of the Galactic Commerce Guild, of the cutthroat negotiations, and the careful exploitation of every advantage. She thought of how quickly her husband's business partners had abandoned her when the credits stopped flowing. And she thought of this simple rancher who'd asked for nothing except the chance to help. "My children are happy here," she said quietly. "They're good kids. You raised them right. I raised them to survive in a world that no longer exists for us." Jack turned to look at her. "Then maybe it's time to teach them about a different world. One where a neighbor helps a neighbor and a person's worth ain't measured in credits." 2 months later, the Galactic Commerce Guild finally responded to Rita's communications. They offered her transport off Earth, processing of her remaining assets, and placement in a guild resettlement program that would put her somewhere in the outer colonies with a subsistence stipend and a mountain of debt to work off. The offer was exactly as bleak as she'd expected. Rita sat in Jack's office, staring at the holographic display of legal documents. Her children were outside, laughing as Jack taught them how to rope fence posts. Through the window, she could see the vast expanse of the ranch, the honest work, the simple dignity of a life built on mutual respect rather than exploitation. She thought about the Galactic Commerce Guild, about climbing back into that world of constant calculation and careful betrayal. She thought about her children growing up in a resettlement colony, learning that the universe was a place where you took what you could and trusted no one. Then she thought about pancakes on Sunday mornings, about Mrs. Patterson's gentle humor and Jack's patient lessons, about a world where a stranger had looked at her crashed ship and seen not an opportunity for profit, but simply people who needed help. Rita deleted the message from the guild. She opened a new one, this time to the Human Research Institute that had been mediating her communications. The message was simple. She was requesting asylum on Earth for herself and her children, along with information about how to begin the process of becoming a legal resident. When Jack came in an hour later, dusty from work and smelling of hay and honest sweat, she told him her decision. He nodded slowly, a small smile crossing his weathered face. "You'll need jobs," he said practically. "I could use help with the books, if you're interested. Mrs. Patterson's been after me to get the accounting system organized for years. And the kids could earn their keep with chores, if that sits right with you. You would employ us? I'd be a fool not to. You're sharp as a tack, and those kids learn fast. Besides," he added, his smile widening, "Thomas is already a better hand with the horses than I was at his age. Be ashamed to waste that talent." Rita felt something unfamiliar blooming in her chest. It took her a moment to recognize it as hope. Not the calculated hope of a good investment or a profitable contract, but the simple hope of a person who'd found a place where she belonged. "Thank you," she said, "for everything." Jack tipped his hat. "Welcome home, Rita." Outside, her children's laughter echoed across the ranch. Rita looked out at the vast sky, at the land that had seemed so primitive and now felt like salvation. Somewhere above, the Galactic Commerce Guild continued its endless machinations, its calculations and exploitations. Down here, on a backwater planet that most spacefaring races considered barely civilized, a simple rancher had taught her something the Guild would never understand. Sometimes the most advanced thing a civilization could do was remember how to be human. Or in her case, how to be humane. And that lesson, Rita thought, was worth more than all the credits in the galaxy.